Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
Iris Bellamy stood in the line of first years, her heart hammering so loudly she was quite certain everyone around her could hear it. The great hall of Hogwarts stretched before her in all its magnificence. Thousands of candles floated beneath an enchanted ceiling that reflected the starry September sky, and 4 long tables were packed with faces of students who watched the newcomers with interest. Iris clenched her hands tighter, trying to still the trembling in her fingers. Professor McGonagall, who looked stern even at 90 years old, carried a patched, tattered hat on a 3-legged stool, the sorting hat. Iris swallowed. She had read about it in Hogwarts, a History, which her mother had given her over the summer. But seeing it with her own eyes was quite another matter. The hat looked old, so old it seemed to remember the founders of the school themselves. Before the sorting, the hat sang its annual song in a creaky voice, telling of the 4 houses and their virtues. Iris listened, trying to understand where she truly belonged. Gryffindor, for the brave, but she wasn't certain of her courage. Ravenclaw, for the clever, and that sounded reassuring, for she truly did love learning. Hufflepuff, for the loyal and hard-working, which also wasn't far from the truth. And Slytherin. Slytherin was for the ambitious and cunning. Iris wasn't sure if that was her. Of course, she had dreams. She wanted to become a potions mistress like her mother, perhaps even better. Was that ambition or just a dream? Names were called one by one, arranged in alphabetical order. Iris watched as children sat on the stool and the hat descended upon their heads, sometimes shouting out the house name instantly, sometimes pondering for long minutes. One girl with red hair went to Gryffindor to thunderous applause. A boy with dark curly hair went to Ravenclaw, smiling barely noticeably. "Bellamy, Iris!" Professor McGonagall's clear voice rang out. Iris took a step forward, feeling her legs turn to cotton wool. She walked between the tables, conscious of hundreds of eyes watching her. The stool seemed too high when she climbed onto it, trying to sit neatly. Professor McGonagall lifted the hat, and for a moment Iris saw the dark fabric inside, worn by ages of use. Then the hat descended over her head, covering her eyes, and the world disappeared. A soft voice sounded right in her ear, and Iris nearly jumped. "Interesting, very interesting. A clever head, that's for certain. Ravenclaw would be glad to have you. But there's something else. There's ambition, yes, a deeply hidden desire to achieve more. not simply to learn, but to become the best. And there's cunning. You understand how to reach your goals. You see paths where others see only walls. Iris unconsciously held her breath. The hat continued. Ravenclaw will teach you wisdom, but Slytherin will help you realize your full potential. There you'll find not only knowledge, but the power to use it. So it had better be Slytherin! The hat shouted loudly, and the great hall filled with the sound of applause. Iris removed the hat with trembling hands and returned it to Professor McGonagall, who nodded at her with an expression that was difficult to interpret. Approval? Just protocol? Iris didn't know. She turned to the table with silver and green banners, where she was greeted with smiles and waves. Older students nodded welcomingly, and the first years who had already been sorted into Slytherin shuffled over, making room for her. "Well done," said a boy with dark hair sitting nearby. "I'm Casper Whitmore," he said. "Iris," she replied quietly, sitting down on the bench. "Iris Bellamy." The sorting continued. Iris watched as several more first years joined their table. A tall girl with straight dark hair named Daphne Thornwick, who carried herself with a certain elegance. A smiling girl with curly fair hair named Isla Winters, whose eyes shone with delight. And a quiet boy named Marcus Ridley, who sat at the edge of the table and immediately became absorbed in examining the ceiling. When the last first year, a boy with the surname Zabini, was sent to Slytherin under friendly applause, Professor McGonagall took away the hat and stool. The headmistress, an elderly witch with piercing eyes behind half-moon spectacles, rose and welcomed everyone to the new school year. Her speech was short, warnings about the forbidden forest, reminders of the rules, and wishes for a successful year to all students. And then the real magic began. The empty golden plates suddenly filled with food: roasts, potatoes, vegetables, pies, gravy, rolls, fruit. The smells were so intense that Iris felt her stomach growl loudly. She hadn't realized how hungry she was after the long journey from King's Cross. "First time at Hogwarts?" asked Daphne, helping herself to roasted chicken and potatoes. "Yes," answered Iris, taking some vegetables. "And you?" "Same," Daphne smiled, though her smile was somewhat restrained. "But my older sister studied here. She told me a lot about Slytherin." "This is so strange," interjected Isla, sitting across from them. "I'm Muggle-born, so all of this is like a fairy tale to me. Floating candles, enchanted ceilings, food appearing out of nowhere." She spoke quickly, her enthusiasm infectious. Iris couldn't help but smile. She herself was half-blood. Her mother was a witch and her father a Muggle, so she'd grown up knowing both worlds. But even for her, Hogwarts was something special, something that surpassed any stories. The feast continued, and Iris listened to the conversations around her. Older Slytherin students discussed Quidditch teams and upcoming matches, plans for the school year, and rumors about new teachers. She learned that they would be supervised by Professor Waveborn, who taught potions. She was described as demanding but fair. When the main course vanished and desserts appeared, puddings, cakes, ice cream of all possible flavors, Iris felt pleasantly full and slightly sleepy. It had been a long day. The early train, the exciting journey on the Hogwarts Express, the crossing of the lake in small boats. That was the moment when she first saw the castle looming above them in all its grandeur, illuminated by hundreds of windows. And now the sorting and feast. Finally, the head mistress rose again, and all the tables cleared. She wished everyone a good night, and reminded them that the house prefects would lead the first years to their common rooms. The Slytherin prefects, a tall youth named Adrian, and a confident girl named Celine, gathered the first years by the table. "Follow me," said Celine, her voice clear and authoritative. "Don't fall behind. The castle is large, and it's very easy to get lost here, especially in the first days." They left the great hall and began descending, going deeper into the Hogwarts dungeons. The corridors grew colder, the stone walls damper, and the torches sparser. Iris walked alongside the other first years, trying to remember the way, but after the third turn she'd already lost her sense of direction. "The Slytherin common room is located beneath the lake," Adrian explained, leading them down steep stairs. "That's why it's always a bit cool here. But don't worry, the fireplaces work well and we get used to it." They stopped before a smooth stone wall with a carved image of a serpent. "The password for this week is ambition," said Celine, and the stone wall began to part, revealing a passage. Iris stepped over the threshold and froze. The Slytherin common room was beautiful. She had expected something dark and gloomy, but instead she saw a long, low room with carved stone walls and ceiling. Green lamps hung on chains, casting soft, calming light. A large window in one of the walls showed a view of the lake. The water was dark green, and from time to time a fish or something larger swam past, casting shadows. It was hypnotic. The furniture was comfortable. Deep leather armchairs and sofas gathered around a fireplace that was already blazing, casting warm orange light. The carpets were thick and soft underfoot. Portraits of former Slytherins hung on the walls, some dozing, others watching the newcomers with interest. "Girls, your dormitories are to the left," said Celine, pointing to one of the doors. "Boys, to the right. Your things are already there. Don't go to bed too late. Tomorrow is the first day of classes." Iris climbed the narrow stone stairs leading to their dormitory with Daphne and Isla. When they opened the door, they saw a circular room with 5 four-poster beds decorated with green and silver coverings. Next to each bed stood a trunk with belongings, and tall, narrow windows showed even more of the lake. "This is incredible," whispered Isla, approaching the window and pressing her nose to the glass. "Look, something's swimming there. Do you think it's the giant squid?" "Possibly," replied Daphne, already unpacking her trunk with methodical precision. "I was told it's harmless."
"Even friendly if you bring it a snack." Iris approached her bed. It was second from the left, and opened her trunk. Her things were neatly folded: robes, textbooks, parchment, ink, a few personal items from home. She took out her pajamas and began changing, feeling fatigue finally taking its toll. "Strange to think we live here now," she said quietly, sitting on the edge of the bed, "that this is our home for the next 7 years. Or at least for this year," replied Daphne practically, "though I hope to stay for all 7. "Me too," added Isla, already lying in her bed. "But first we have to survive the first week. I heard the first lessons can be tough." They whispered a bit more in the darkness until one by one they fell asleep. Iris lay looking at the canopy above her, listening to the quiet sounds of the castle, the distant rush of water, footsteps somewhere above, wind in the corridors. She thought about the sorting hat, about its words. Slytherin. She was a Slytherin now. What did that mean? Who would she become here? But fatigue won out, and soon Iris plunged into deep sleep, where castles floated in the sky and lakes were filled with starlight. The first thing Iris felt the next morning was cold. Not unpleasant, but noticeable enough to wake her. She opened her eyes and for a moment couldn't understand where she was. Green and silver fabric of the canopy, quiet breathing of other girls, dark green light seeping through the windows. Hogwarts. She was at Hogwarts, in Slytherin. Iris smiled and stretched, feeling her muscles ache pleasantly after yesterday's long journey. Movement came from the other side of the room. Daphne was already awake and quietly getting ready, trying not to wake the others. She was dressed in a black robe with green trim on the collar and cuffs, and her hair was neatly combed back. "Good morning," whispered Iris, sitting up. "Morning," replied Daphne, looking around. "We have about 2 hours before breakfast, but I don't want to be late on the first day." Iris nodded and climbed out of bed. Isla was still sleeping, wrapped in her blanket like a cocoon. The 2 other girls in their dormitory, Celeste and Miranda, were also still dozing. Iris quietly reached her trunk and pulled out her new robe. It was a bit long, but her mother had said she'd grow into it within a year. The material was soft but sturdy, and the green Slytherin crest was embroidered on the chest, a serpent coiling around a large letter S. By the time she finished dressing, the other girls were beginning to wake. Isla jumped out of bed with an exclamation. "We're at Hogwarts! This isn't a dream!" Daphne rolled her eyes but smiled. "No, not a dream. Now hurry, or the whole castle will eat breakfast without us."
Together they descended to the common room, where other students were already gathering. Some sat by the fireplace, finishing homework. Others simply talked, sipping tea. Iris noticed Marcus sitting in a corner with a book, so absorbed in reading that he didn't notice anything around him. "Let's go to breakfast," suggested Daphne, and they set off for the great hall. The journey again seemed like a labyrinth, but fortunately they followed a group of older students and didn't get lost. The great hall looked different in the morning than in the evening. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, and the ceiling showed a bright blue sky with fluffy white clouds. The tables were already filled with food: toast, scrambled eggs, bacon, sausages, porridge, fruit, juice, tea, coffee. Iris sat at the Slytherin table and helped herself to a portion of porridge with honey and fruit. She wasn't very hungry in the morning, but she understood she needed strength for the first day of classes. "Here are your timetables," said Celine, handing out sheets of parchment to the first years. "Check them carefully. Your first lesson is in an hour." Iris took her timetable and scanned it with her eyes. Monday, 9 o'clock, herbology with Hufflepuff. 11 o'clock, history of magic. Tuesday, 9 o'clock, potions, double lesson. 1400, transfiguration with Gryffindor. Wednesday, 9 o'clock, charms with Ravenclaw. 11 o'clock, defense against the dark arts. Thursday, 9 o'clock, herbology. 1400, history of magic. Friday, 9 o'clock, potions. 11 o'clock, transfiguration. 1500, flying, all houses together. There were also astronomy lessons every Wednesday at midnight. "Herbology first," said Isla, studying her timetable. "That's with Professor Longbottom, right? I read about him. He was a war hero." "Yes," nodded Daphne. "My sister said he's a wonderful teacher, strict but fair." After breakfast, they still had a bit of time, so they decided to walk the grounds. The September sun was warm, and Iris enjoyed the feeling of fresh air after the cool dungeons. They walked past the great lake, watching the water shimmer in the sun, and saw a huge tentacle briefly appear above the surface, the giant squid. "The greenhouses are there." Daphne pointed to a row of glass buildings near the castle. "Let's go. I don't want to be late." Greenhouse 1 was a large, bright building with glass walls and roof. Inside, it was warm and humid, the air filled with the scent of earth, plants, and something slightly sweet. Long tables were arranged in rows, and on each already lay pots with various plants, trowels, gloves, and tools. Professor Longbottom met them at the entrance. He was a middle-aged man with a kind face and warm eyes. His robes were slightly earthy, and his hands looked like those of someone who worked a great deal with their hands. "Good morning," he greeted them. "Come in, find yourselves places. You can work in pairs, one Slytherin, one Hufflepuff. This will help you get to know each other better between houses," he explained. Iris ended up paired with a Hufflepuff girl named Emma Blackwood. She was short, with dark hair pulled into a ponytail, and had a pleasant smile. "Hello," said Emma. "I'm not very good with plants, so I hope you know more." "Not sure," Iris answered honestly, "but we'll learn together." Professor Longbottom began the lesson by explaining the basics of herbology. "Magical plants are the foundation of many branches of magic," he said, walking between the tables. "From potions to healing, from transfiguration to defensive magic. Understanding plants, their properties and needs, that's what distinguishes a true witch or wizard from an amateur." He showed them several plants they would be studying that year. Snitch seeds, small silver spheres that flew around if touched. Whispering ivy, a plant that whispered secrets if properly cared for. And Mimbilus mimbletonia, a spiky cactus that shot foul-smelling liquid if disturbed. "Today, we'll start with something simple," said the professor, "repotting snitch seeds. This is delicate work because the seeds react very quickly to touch. If you grab them too sharply, they'll fly off and might escape. But if you're careful and patient, all will be well." Iris put on gloves and carefully approached her pot. The snitch seed was the size of a walnut, silver and shiny. When she brought her hand close, the seed twitched. "Slowly," advised Emma, watching. "As if you want to stroke it, not grab it." Iris nodded and gently ran her finger over the seed. It calmed down, and she carefully lifted it, moving it to a new, larger pot with fresh soil. The seed trembled, then settled, and Iris sprinkled soil over it, carefully tamping it down. "Excellent work, Miss Bellamy," said Professor Longbottom, passing by. "I see you have a light touch. That's an important quality for herbology." Iris felt warmth from the praise. For the rest of the lesson, she worked together with Emma, and they managed to repot all the seeds without incident. When the lesson ended, Professor Longbottom gave them homework to write an essay 1 foot long about the properties of snitch seeds and their uses in magic. The next lesson, History of Magic, was completely different. The classroom was in one of the castle towers, small and musty. Professor Binns, a ghost, floated through the blackboard and began monotonously presenting material about the Goblin Rebellion of 1612. His voice was so soporific that within 15 minutes half the class was beginning to blink their eyes. Iris tried to take notes, but even for her, who loved learning, it was difficult to concentrate. Isla openly fell asleep, her head falling onto the desk with a soft thud. Keep her eyes open by force of will, but her quill hung over the parchment, not moving. And then the goblins, led by Ergon the Unshakable, decided to rise up against the wizards, who, in their opinion, unfairly controlled the production of magical artifacts. droned Professor Binns. Time dragged slowly. Iris wrote down key dates and names, trying to catch at least some structure in the flow of words. When the bell finally rang, announcing the end of the lesson, everyone jumped as if awakened from deep sleep. "Homework," came Professor Binns's voice, as students were already gathering their things. "An essay 2 feet long on the causes and consequences of the Goblin Rebellion by next Thursday." They left the classroom, stretching and yawning. "That was the most boring thing I've ever experienced," sighed Isla. "How will we survive a whole year?" "Coffee," Daphne replied jokingly. "Very strong coffee." Lunch in the Great Hall was livelier than breakfast. Iris enjoyed the dishes. The meat pie with vegetables was especially tasty, and listened to conversations around her. Other first years shared impressions of their first lessons. A boy named Theo told how in Charms his quill flew out of his hands and hit the professor right in the eye. Fortunately, the professor just blinked and returned the quill with a smile. After lunch, they had free time, and Iris decided to explore the castle. She took her bag of textbooks, not because she intended to study, but because it gave her an excuse to be in the corridors if anyone asked. Hogwarts was a labyrinth. Corridors twisted and turned, staircases moved, and doors sometimes opened into different rooms than expected. Iris walked past portraits that whispered to each other, past mirrors that showed reflections with a few seconds' delay, past rooms filled with old brooms, broken chairs, and piles of books. She found the library almost by accident. A huge room with rows and rows of shelves stretching to the high ceiling. The smell of old paper and ink was so familiar, so calming, that Iris immediately felt at home. She walked between the shelves, running her fingers along the spines of books. A history of magic, complete course. Spells for beginners. 1,000 magical herbs and fungi. Fantastic beasts and where to find them. Lost? A quiet voice sounded behind her. Iris jumped and turned. Marcus Ridley stood there, holding a stack of books under his arm. "No," she replied, calming her heartbeat. "Just looking. And you?" "Looking for a book about magical creatures," he explained. "I want to read about every creature mentioned in Care of Magical Creatures lessons, though we won't have that subject until 3rd year. But it's better to prepare in advance," he said seriously. Iris smiled. She understood this thirst for knowledge, this desire to learn more than necessary. "I can help you look if you want," she offered. They spent the next hour searching for books in the section on magical creatures. Marcus turned out to be quiet but very knowledgeable. He knew amazing facts about hippogriffs, about how they demanded respect before any contact, about baby dragons that could live in small spaces if properly enchanted, about phoenixes that rose from their own ashes. "You really know a lot," remarked Iris, sitting at one of the tables. Marcus blushed. I just read a lot. It's easier for me with books than with people, he admitted. I understand, replied Iris. Me too. They exchanged smiles, quiet, understanding, and continued reading together until it was time for dinner. Dinner in the great hall was noisy and cheerful. Iris sat between Daphne and Isla, savoring braised vegetables and chicken, and listened as Isla told about her first experience with magic. I tried to say the illumination spell I saw in a book, and my wand spat out sparks, she recounted, eyes wide with delight. It was incredible. I never thought I could do magic. This is only the beginning, said Daphne with a slight smile. Wait until we get to real spells. After dinner, Iris returned to the Slytherin common room, feeling pleasantly tired. She sat in one of the armchairs by the fireplace, took out her herbology textbook, and began writing the essay about snitch seeds. Around her, other students were also doing homework, whispering amongst themselves or simply resting. The green light from the lake cast whimsical patterns on the walls. The warmth from the fireplace was calming. Iris wrote about the properties of snitch seeds, how they were used in potions of speed, how they needed to be gathered at dawn for maximum effectiveness, how they symbolized swiftness and elusiveness in ancient magic. When she finished the essay, it was already late. Most of the first years had already dispersed to their dormitories. Iris rolled up the parchment, put it in her bag, and went up to her room. Daphne and Isla were already asleep, their breathing even and calm. Iris quietly changed into her pajamas and crawled under the warm blanket. She lay looking at the green light flickering on the ceiling, listening to the quiet lapping of water outside the window. The first day was over. She had survived it, and more than that, she had enjoyed it. The following days flowed into a rhythm. Tuesday brought a double potions lesson with Professor Waveborn, who turned out to be exactly as described, demanding but fair. She was a middle-aged witch with dark hair pulled into a strict bun and penetrating dark eyes that seemed to see everything. The potions dungeons were even colder than the Slytherin common room. Tables were arranged in rows, and on each stood a cauldron, a set of ingredients, and precise scales. On the blackboard was already written a recipe, simple healing draught. Potions, began Professor Waveborn, her voice echoing in the silence, is both art and science. It's not simply throwing ingredients into a cauldron and hoping for the best. Every ingredient has properties. Every temperature matters. Every stir of your spoon changes the result. Today, you will make your first potion. I don't expect perfection, but I do expect diligence. She led them through the process step by step. Iris listened carefully, noting every detail. First, ingredients had to be prepared. ginger root cut into even slices, dried mint leaves crushed, precisely 3 drops of dittany essence measured. Precision is key, Professor Waveborn reminded them, walking between the tables. Too much dittany, and your potion becomes poisonous. Too little, and it will be ineffective. Iris worked slowly, checking each measurement twice. She lit the fire under the cauldron, poured in distilled water, and began adding ingredients in the correct order. First the ginger. The cauldron hissed, and the water turned light gold. Then the mint. The smell filled the air, fresh and slightly sharp. And finally, the dittany. 3 drops, one after another, each falling into the center of the cauldron. Now stir, instructed the professor. 7 times clockwise, then 3 times anti-clockwise. Slowly, evenly. Iris concentrated, counting to herself. The potion began changing color, from gold to light green. Steam rose upward, and the smell became sweeter, almost honey-like. "Good, Miss Bellamy," said Professor Waveborn, stopping by her table. "Your potion has the right color and consistency. 10 points to Slytherin. Pour it into a phial and bring it to me," she added. Iris felt pride. She carefully poured the potion into a small glass phial, which immediately became warm to the touch, a sign that the potion was active. Not everyone was so lucky. Strictly avoid any sudden changes in dittany, and his potion exploded, showering him with sticky green liquid. A Slytherin girl forgot to stir anti-clockwise, and her potion solidified into a murky mass. "Potions require patience," said Professor Waveborn at the end of the lesson. "But for those willing to learn, it is one of the most powerful branches of magic." Homework: an essay about the properties of dittany and why it is a critical ingredient in healing potions. 2 feet of parchment, by Friday. After potions came Transfiguration with Professor Grayson. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. His classroom was bright, with large windows and rows of tables. "Transfiguration," he began, "is the art of changing the form and essence of objects. It is one of the most difficult and dangerous branches of magic if done incorrectly. Today we shall begin with theory." He explained the basic principles, how magic penetrates the structure of an object, how visualization is key to successful transfiguration, how it was necessary to understand both the initial and final forms. "By the end of this year," he said, "you will be able to transform a match into a needle." It seems simple, but it actually requires precision, concentration, and understanding of deep magic. He gave each of them a match and demonstrated the correct wand movement. A short, sharp flick, accompanied by the incantation Mutatio Acus. Iris tried. The match twitched slightly, but didn't change. She tried again and again. By the end of the lesson, her match had become slightly more silvery at the tip, but it still hadn't become a needle. "Don't worry," Professor Grayson reassured them, seeing disappointment on the students' faces. "Transfiguration requires practice, a lot of practice. Keep trying, and you'll certainly succeed." Wednesday brought charms with Professor Flitwick, who, despite his age, he was well over 100, was lively and energetic. He stood on a pile of books behind his desk to be taller. "Charms," he squeaked, "is the most versatile branch of magic. You can do anything. Illuminate darkness, move objects, protect yourself, create wonders." The first spell he taught them was Lumos, a basic spell for creating light at the tip of one's wand. Iris listened carefully as Professor Flitwick demonstrated the correct pronunciation and wand movement. "Lu-mos," he emphasized, accent on the second syllable, and the movement, a light upward flick, as if you're lifting something weightless. Iris raised her wand, concentrated, and pronounced, "Lumos." The tip of her wand flared with soft white light. It wasn't very bright, but it was glowing. Her first successful spell. "Excellent, Miss Bellamy," exclaimed Professor Flitwick, clapping his hands. 10 points to Slytherin." Iris couldn't suppress a smile. She looked at the light on her wand, feeling how the warmth of magic flowed through her. It was an incredible feeling, like an inner current, warm and alive. The rest of the week, Iris spent in the rhythm of lessons, homework, and exploring the castle. She discovered favorite places. A corner in the library by a window where the light fell perfectly for reading. A spot by the lake where an old tree grew with branches overhanging the water. A small alcove in one of the corridors where a portrait of an old wizard was always ready to talk about the history of magic. She spent evenings in the common room doing homework by the fireplace. Isla often sat nearby, asking countless questions about the magical world, whilst Daphne worked with methodical focus, rarely getting distracted. Marcus sometimes joined them, quietly reading his book about magical creatures. But his presence was pleasant. He didn't disturb the silence, but complemented it. By the end of the first week, Iris felt that Hogwarts was beginning to feel like home. She knew the way to most classrooms, more or less, knew the best time to come to the Great Hall to avoid crowds, knew that Professor Waveborn valued precision, Professor Grayson patience, and Professor Flitwick enthusiasm. On Friday evening, as she sat in the common room finishing her essay for Professor Binns, Iris felt a strange peace. The week had been difficult. So much new, so much learning, so much adaptation. But she had managed, and more than that, she had enjoyed it. "Are you always so focused?" asked Isla, sitting down beside her. "I suppose," replied Iris, setting down her quill. "I just like learning." "That's good," said Isla. "But sometimes you need to rest too. Shall we go for a walk by the lake tomorrow after breakfast? The weather should be nice." "I'd love to," smiled Iris. They talked a bit more until the fire began dying down and students, one by one, began dispersing to their dormitories. Iris went up to her room, changed, and crawled under the warm blanket. The first week was over. She was a Slytherin. She was a Hogwarts student, and this was only the beginning. Saturday began gently. Iris woke later than usual, when the sunlight, or rather the green underwater light from the lake, was already filling the dormitory. She stretched, enjoying the absence of an alarm clock and the need to hurry to lessons. The first weekend day at Hogwarts. Daphne was already up and sitting on her bed, carefully combing her hair. Isla was still asleep, tangled in her blanket, so that only a curly mop of hair was visible. Celeste and Miranda had disappeared somewhere, probably gone to an early breakfast. "Good morning," whispered Iris, not wanting to wake Isla. "Morning," replied Daphne, setting down her comb. "Are you going to breakfast?" "Yes, in a few minutes." Iris washed in the bathroom adjoining the dormitory. Marble sinks, large mirrors that sometimes gave unexpected advice about hairstyles. One mirror decided to comment today. "Dear, those dark circles under your eyes need concealing. Are you sleeping enough?" "I'm trying," Iris replied to the mirror, smiling. Breakfast at the weekend was more relaxed. Students ate slowly, not rushing to lessons, and the great hall was filled with unhurried conversations and laughter. Iris helped herself to toast with jam and a goblet of orange juice, sitting next to Isla, who had finally woken and looked sleepy but happy. "We're going to the lake after breakfast, right?" Isla reminded her, yawning. "Yes," confirmed Iris. "The weather's nice. We should make use of it." Marcus sat at the end of the table with a book, as always. But when Iris waved to him, he smiled and nodded slightly in greeting. She decided to invite him to join their walk. After breakfast, the four of them, Iris, Daphne, Isla, and Marcus, set off for the lake. The September air was fresh but not cold, and the sun pleasantly warm. They walked past the greenhouses, where Professor Longbottom was working with some large plants, past the Quidditch pitch, where the Gryffindor team was training, and descended to the lakeshore. The water was calm, mirror-like, reflecting the castle and sky. Iris sat on the grass, hugging her knees, and simply looked. There was something meditative about this view. The huge stone castle rising above the water, towers reaching for the sky, windows sparkling in the sunlight. "Do you think the giant squid is friendly?" asked Isla, peering into the water. "My sister said yes," replied Daphne, settling nearby. She saw it playing with some students last year. It likes when you throw it bread." Marcus silently took out a small book and began reading, but his presence was pleasant. Iris noticed that from time to time he raised his eyes from the pages to look at the lake or the castle, as if collecting images from memory. They sat there for an hour, talking about various things, about lessons, about teachers, about how strange and at the same time wonderful it was to live in a castle where something magical happened at every turn. Isla told how she accidentally opened a door to the wrong room and ended up in a broom cupboard where all the brooms suddenly fell on her. Daphne shared advice from her sister about not getting lost in the castle. Always look at the portraits. They can point the way. "Have you already decided what you want to do after Hogwarts?" Isla suddenly asked. The question was unexpected for 11-year-olds, but somehow didn't seem strange. "I want to work at the Ministry of Magic," Daphne replied confidently, "in the Department of International Magical Cooperation. Travel, meet different wizards from all over the world." "I want to be a potions mistress," said Iris, "like my mother, or even invent new potions." "I don't know yet," sighed Isla. "Everything's so new. Perhaps I want to teach magic to Muggleborns, help them adapt." "And you, Marcus?" asked Iris. Marcus raised his eyes from his book, slightly surprised to be asked. "Magical creatures," he said quietly. "I want to study them, help them, work in reserves, or research new species." They all smiled, 4 11-year-olds with dreams that seemed so distant and at the same time so real. Monday brought a return to learning, and Iris felt herself falling into rhythm. Now she knew the way to all the classrooms, more or less, knew the best time to come to the Great Hall to avoid crowds, knew that Professor Waveborn valued precision, Professor Grayson patience, and Professor Flitwick enthusiasm. The charms lesson on Monday was devoted to Wingardium Leviosa, the levitation charm. Professor Flitwick stood on his pile of books demonstrating the correct technique. "The wand movement is very important," he squeaked, his wand describing a smooth arc. "Swish and flick. And don't forget the pronunciation. Wingardium Leviosa. Accent on gar and o." Before each student lay a feather. The task seemed simple. Make the feather fly. But as quickly became apparent, it wasn't so easy. Iris raised her wand, concentrated on the feather, and pronounced, "Wingardium Leviosa." The feather twitched, but remained on the table. "Swish and flick," Professor Flitwick reminded her, passing by. "Imagine you're lifting the feather with an invisible hand." Iris tried again, this time focusing not only on the words, but also on the feeling, imagining how magic flowed through her, through the wand, and wrapped around the feather. imagining how it gently lifted upward. Wingardium Leviosa. The feather shuddered, rose an inch above the table, and fell back. "Better," Professor Flitwick encouraged her.
"Keep going." Throughout the classroom, spells rang out. Some feathers jumped, others spun. One even flew out the window, forcing Professor Flitwick to quickly return it. A Ravenclaw boy accidentally lifted his textbook instead of the feather, which crashed to the floor with a loud thud. Iris tried again and again. By the end of the lesson, she managed to lift the feather several inches and hold it there for 3 seconds before losing concentration. "Well done, Miss Bellamy," praised Professor Flitwick. "Practice at home, and soon you'll be able to levitate not just feathers." Homework was simple. An essay 1 foot long about the theory of levitation, and practicing the spell. Transfiguration that week continued to be a challenge.
Professor Grayson was patient, but even his patience couldn't make matches instantly transform into needles. Transfiguration requires absolute understanding of both objects, he explained, drawing diagrams on the blackboard. You must know the structure of the match, wood, phosphorus on the tip, the shape. And you must know the structure of the needle, metal, sharp point, eye. Then, and only then, can your magic accomplish the transformation. He showed them images of a match and needle created by magic that rotated in the air, demonstrating every detail. "Now try," he said. "Visualize, concentrate, and pronounce the spell with intent." Iris held the match in her left hand, wand in her right. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining the match, its wooden body, red tip. Then imagined the needle, silvery, smooth, with an eye. "Mutatio acus," she pronounced, sharply flicking her wand. The match changed. Not completely, but now it was longer, thinner, and the tip became silvery. "Progress," said Professor Grayson, stopping by her table. "That's not bad for the second week. Keep practicing." But Iris enjoyed potions most of all. Professor Waveborn that week taught them to create an anti-boil potion, slightly more complex than the previous one because it required precise temperature control. "Temperature," said Professor Waveborn, her voice echoing in the cool dungeons, "is what most beginners ignore. But temperature changes everything. Too hot and your ingredients will burn. Too cold and they won't activate. You must feel the potion, understand when to add heat, when to reduce it." She taught them a simple spell for controlling the fire under the cauldron. Incendio minimus to increase and reducto flamma to decrease. Iris prepared the ingredients with surgical precision, sliced snake root into even circles, crushed dried rain beetles into powder, strained juice from bitter wormwood. Every step was important. Every detail mattered. When she began brewing the potion, she felt how magic started working. The cauldron bubbled quietly.
The liquid changed color from dark green to light yellow. The smell was bitter, but not unpleasant. Iris watched the temperature, occasionally adjusting the fire, feeling when heat needed to be added and when reduced. "Now add the last ingredient," instructed Professor Waveborn. "Beetle powder. Pour it in slowly whilst stirring." Iris carefully poured in the powder, stirring the potion clockwise. It hissed, sparkled, then calmed, acquiring a bright yellow color with a light pearlescent sheen. "Perfect, Miss Bellamy," said Professor Waveborn, nodding approvingly. "Your potion has the correct consistency and color. 15 points to Slytherin." Iris felt warmth of pride. She truly had a talent for potions. It wasn't something supernatural, just attention to detail, patience, and desire to do everything right. But it worked. Tuesday evening, Iris decided to spend time in the library. She had several essays to write. One for History of Magic about the Goblin Rebellions, one for Herbology about the properties of whispering ivy, and one for Charms about the theory of levitation. The library was quiet and almost empty. Most students were in their common rooms or at dinner. Iris walked between the shelves, finding the necessary books, and settled at her favorite table by the window. She unrolled parchment, dipped her quill in ink, and began writing about the Goblin Rebellions. The topic was dry, like everything Professor Binns taught. But if one delved into books, interesting details could be found about goblin magic that differed from human, about their art of metalwork, about complex political intrigues. "Are you also doing an essay for Binns?" a quiet voice sounded. Iris raised her eyes. Marcus stood there with several books under his arm. "Yes," she replied, smiling. "Sit down if you like." He sat opposite, quietly arranging his books and parchment. For several minutes they worked in silence, only the sound of quill on parchment and quiet rustling of pages breaking the peace. "You really like learning, don't you?" Marcus asked unexpectedly. Iris thought for a moment. "Yes," she replied. "I like discovering new things, understanding how things work. And you?" "I like reading," said Marcus. "It's easier to understand books than people," he admitted. Iris smiled. "I understand. But people can be interesting too if you give them a chance." They continued working, and with time their silence became comfortable, companionable. Iris found that Marcus's presence was calming. He didn't demand conversation, didn't create tension, just was there, and it was pleasant. When she finished the essay for Binns and began working on the essay for Herbology, Marcus raised his eyes from his book. "Are you writing about whispering ivy?" he asked. "Yes," confirmed Iris. "Do you know anything about it?" "A bit." Marcus opened one of his books. "There's a chapter here about magical plants that have connections with creatures. Whispering ivy
often grows near bowtruckle nests. They protect each other. The ivy warns the bowtruckle of danger, and the bowtruckle protects the ivy's roots from herbivores. That's interesting. Iris quickly jotted this down. Thank you. They exchanged smiles, and Iris felt she'd found a true friend. Not one who talked all the time, but one who understood the value of silence and shared work. They sat in the library until late evening, until Madame Pince, the librarian, asked them to leave because the library was closing. Together, they returned to the Slytherin common room, talking about books, about favorite authors of magical literature, about which subjects they liked best. Wednesday brought Defense Against the Dark Arts with Professor Bloom. He was a young man, about 35, with dark hair and watchful eyes. His classroom was filled with various magical objects, mirrors showing protective shields, portraits demonstrating historical battles, shelves with books about dark and light magic. Defense Against the Dark Arts, he began, walking between rows, isn't only about spells. It's about understanding. You cannot defend yourself against something you don't understand. Therefore, we shall begin with theory, with understanding what dark magic is, how it works, and why it's dangerous. He spoke about various forms of dark magic, curses that inflict pain, spells that control the mind, magic that feeds on fear or anger. But he also emphasized that knowledge of dark magic didn't mean using it. Knowledge is a weapon, he said, but it's also defense. The more you know, the better you can protect yourself and others. He taught them a basic defensive spell, theoretically, because practice would come later. The spell was called Protego Minimus, a reduced version of full Protego that first years could learn. This spell creates a light shield, Professor Bloom explained. It won't stop a serious attack, but it can deflect light curses or protect against physical objects. You'll learn it practically next week. Iris carefully took notes. Wand movement, circular sweep before oneself, pronunciation, Protego Minimus, mental concentration, imagine a wall between yourself and danger. Homework was an essay 1.5 feet long about the difference between defensive and dark magic, and why it's important to understand both. That same night occurred the first astronomy lesson. Iris had already heard from older students that astronomy always took place at midnight, and that it could be exhausting, but also magical. At 11:30, all Slytherin and Ravenclaw first years gathered at the entrance to the astronomy tower. They climbed the long spiral stairs, their footsteps echoing in the night silence. At the top of the tower, Professor Sinistra met them, an elegant witch with gray hair and kind eyes. The night was clear, and the sky was studded with stars. Telescopes were already arranged in a circle, each adjusted to a certain part of the sky. "Good evening," Professor Sinistra greeted them. "Astronomy is the study of celestial bodies and their influence on magic. Stars, planets, the moon, all of them have magical properties we can use. Today we shall begin with the basics, studying the brightest constellations." She showed them the Great Bear, Orion, Cassiopeia. Iris looked through the telescope, marveling at the clarity of the stars, which seemed so close they could be touched. Professor Sinistra explained how each constellation had magical properties. Orion was connected with strength and hunting, Cassiopeia with pride and beauty, the Great Bear with direction and journeys. "Astronomy requires patience," she said. "You cannot hurry celestial bodies. They move at their own rhythm, and we must adapt to them." The lesson lasted until 1 o'clock, and when Iris finally returned to the dormitory, she was exhausted, but also enchanted. There was something special about studying stars, a feeling of connection with something greater, more ancient than any magic on earth. By the end of the second week, Iris felt that she was truly becoming part of Hogwarts. She knew the best time to visit the library, late evening when most students were in common rooms. The tastiest dishes in the Great Hall, potato pie on Thursdays, apple strudel for dessert on Fridays. The best route from the dungeons to the astronomy tower, through the eastern corridor on the 3rd floor, past the portrait of the timid witch. Her friendship with Daphne, Isla, and Marcus was growing stronger. They did homework together, had lunch together, explored the castle together in their free time. Daphne turned out to be wonderful at organization. She created a schedule of their homework so they wouldn't fall behind. Isla brought cheerfulness and enthusiasm, always finding something interesting or funny in everyday life. Marcus was quiet support, always ready to share a book or interesting fact. On Friday evening, when they sat in the common room by the fireplace, Isla suddenly asked, "Do you feel that Hogwarts is becoming home?" Iris pondered. She thought about her real home, about her mother and father, about her room, about the familiar. But then thought about Hogwarts, about the green light from the lake, about the smell of potions in the dungeons, about the library silence, about the friends sitting nearby. "Yes," she replied quietly. "It's becoming." Daphne nodded in agreement. Marcus smiled without raising his eyes from his book. "I'm so glad," said Isla, "because I feel the same way. Here at Hogwarts, I finally feel I belong somewhere, that I'm not just a girl who can accidentally do strange things, but a witch, a real witch." They all smiled. There was something touching in these words, a simple acknowledgement of what they all felt. That evening they spent together, talking about everything and nothing, until the fire began dying down, and students one by one began dispersing to dormitories. Iris rose last, extinguishing the candles and looking at the common room once more. at the dark green walls, at the window into the lake, at the cozy armchairs. Yes, Hogwarts was becoming home. And Slytherin, with its cool dungeons and ambitious students, was her home now. She went up to the dormitory, changed, and crawled under the blanket. The second week was over. There were still many weeks, months, years of learning ahead. And Iris couldn't wait to discover what else Hogwarts hid, what magic she would master, what witch she would become. But for now, she just lay in the darkness, listening to the quiet breathing of her roommates, the lapping of water outside the window, the distant sounds of the castle that never fully slept, and smiled. The third week began with an excitement that permeated all the first years. On Friday, the first flying lesson was to take place. Iris heard talk about it everywhere, at breakfast, in the corridors, in the common room. Some students were delighted, others nervous, but all waited with anticipation. "My sister said the first flight is always the scariest," Daphne shared at breakfast on Monday. "But if you don't think about the height, everything goes well." "I've never flown," admitted Isla, spreading jam on her toast. "I don't even know if I'll be able to." "Of course you will," Iris assured her, though she herself was a bit nervous too. She had flown a few times on her mother's old broom, but that was long ago, and she didn't remember what it felt like to be high in the air. That week, the lessons became more complex. In potions, Professor Waveborn taught them to prepare a sleeping draught, a delicate potion that required precision not only in ingredients, but also in brewing time. "The sleeping draught," Professor Waveborn explained, walking between rows of cauldrons, "is one of the most commonly used potions in magical medicine. It calms the mind, helps those who suffer from insomnia to sleep. But," she raised a finger for emphasis, "if overdosed or incorrectly prepared, it can cause coma or even death. Therefore, precision is absolutely critical." Iris felt her hands tremble slightly as she prepared the ingredients. Lavender, 4 stems, no more, no less. Valerian root, sliced into transparent slices. Crushed moonstone, exactly 1 teaspoon. And most importantly, 3 drops of dew collected at dawn. Professor Waveborn provided them with dew in small glass phials. The preparation process was lengthy. The water had to boil, then cool to a precisely determined temperature, measured by a special enchanted thermometer. Lavender was added first, and the potion acquired a light purple tint. Then valerian. The smell became earthy, calming. Moonstone dissolved slowly, creating silvery sparks on the surface. "And now, the most delicate part," said Professor Waveborn. "The dew. It's added 1 drop at a time with 30-second intervals. If you hurry, the potion will curdle. Too slowly, it will lose its power. Iris carefully took the phial of dew. Her heart beat quickly. She tilted the phial over the cauldron, and the first drop fell precisely in the center. The potion hissed softly, and the purple tint deepened. Iris counted the seconds. 28, 29, 30, and added the second drop. Then, after another 30 seconds of waiting, the third. The potion gleamed. It became a deep purple silvery color, and from it came the scent of lavender and something else, something soft, calming, reminiscent of coziness and peace. "Flawless, Miss Bellamy," said Professor Waveborn, examining her cauldron. "Your potion has the perfect consistency. 10 points to Slytherin. Pour it into a phial and bring it to me," she added. Iris felt pride bottling the potion. This was her best potion yet, not because it was complex, though it was, but because she felt every step, understood the process, saw how magic worked through the ingredients. In Transfiguration, Professor Grayson finally allowed them to see their first success. After 2 weeks of practice, several students managed to partially transform their matches. Iris was one of them. Her match became thin, silvery, and sharp at one end, though there was no needle's eye yet. "Excellent work," praised Professor Grayson. "Most first years require a month to reach this level. Continue practicing, and by the end of term, you'll have a proper needle," he said. In charms, Professor Flitwick began teaching them a second spell, Incendio, a basic spell for creating fire. This was more complex than Lumos because it required greater control of magical energy. "Incendio," Professor Flitwick demonstrated, and a small stream of flame flew from the tip of his wand, dancing in the air. This spell can be useful or dangerous depending on your control. We shall begin with the smallest version, sufficient to light a candle or campfire, but no more. He showed them the wand movement, a sharp downward flick with a wrist turn, and the correct pronunciation, Incendio, with accent on the second syllable. Most importantly, he emphasized, is control. Don't throw all your magic into the spell. Imagine you're opening a tap, gently, slowly, with control. Iris raised her wand, concentrated, and pronounced, "Incendio!" A tiny spark flew from the tip of the wand and immediately went out. Not fire, but a beginning. "Good," Professor Flitwick encouraged. "A spark is the first step. Try again. This time, add more intent." Iris tried again, imagining flame, feeling the warmth of magic within herself. This time, the spark was larger and burned for 2 seconds before going out. By the end of the lesson, several students managed to create a small, stable flame. Iris was close. Her sparks were getting larger and lasting longer, but there was no proper flame yet. Practice at home, Professor Flitwick advised, but carefully. Only over bowls of water or on stone surfaces. I don't want anyone burning down a dormitory, he joked, though there was a serious warning in his eyes. On Wednesday evening, Iris sat in the library, working on an essay for defense against the dark arts, when an unexpected event occurred. She was searching for a book on a shelf, standing on tiptoes, trying to reach a tome on the top shelf, when suddenly the book fell right into her hands. Iris jumped from surprise, nearly dropping the book. She looked around. No one stood nearby. No one was using a wand. She looked at the book. Defensive Magic, History and Practice. Exactly the book she'd been looking for. "Thank you," Iris whispered to the library in general, not knowing whom to thank. The library sometimes helps those who truly seek knowledge. A quiet voice sounded behind her. Iris turned. There stood a girl of about 16 in Ravenclaw robes with a prefect's badge on her chest. Her hair was dark and long, her eyes gray and wise. "Really?" asked Iris. "Yes," the girl smiled. "Hogwarts is alive in a certain sense. It feels when someone truly strives to learn. I'm Celeste Winters, Ravenclaw prefect," she introduced herself. "Iris Bellamy, Slytherin first year," replied Iris. "I know," nodded Celeste. "I've seen you here many evenings. Do you like learning?" "Yes," Iris felt slight embarrassment. "I just enjoy it." "That's good." Celeste placed a hand on her shoulder. "Never be ashamed of love for knowledge. It's the most valuable thing you have. If you ever need help with studying or advice, ask," she added. Iris thanked her, and Celeste left, leaving behind a light scent of old books and something floral. This small moment warmed Iris from within. Hogwarts truly was a special place, where even older students found time to support younger ones. Thursday brought active defense against the dark arts practice. Professor Bloom led them into a large, empty classroom where tables had been pushed to the walls, leaving space for genuine practice. "Last week, you learned the theory," he said, walking between rows of students. "Today, we'll test whether you can apply it in practice. Protego minimus requires not only correct movements and words, but genuine intent. You must truly want to protect yourself. Feel this desire in every cell." He reminded them of the technique they'd studied. Circular sweep of the wand before oneself, as if drawing a shield in the air, and the incantation Protego minimus with clear pronunciation. "Remember what we discussed," he emphasized. "Visualization is critical. Imagine a wall between you and the threat. Not a physical wall, but a wall of pure magic that can deflect attack." Students worked in pairs. One tried to create a shield, the other gently threw small, soft cushions at the shield, enchanted to fly slowly. Iris worked with a Gryffindor girl named Sophie. At first, she tried to create the shield, but nothing happened. The cushion simply flew through the place where the shield should have been and gently touched her shoulder. "Imagine," Sophie advised. "Really imagine the shield, not just words." Iris tried again. This time, she closed her eyes for a moment, imagined a transparent wall before her, solid and immovable. Then opened her wand, swept her wand, and pronounced, "Protego minimus." For a moment, only a brief moment, a faint silvery blue shimmer flashed in the air. The cushion slowed when it touched the shimmer, though it still passed through. "Almost!" exclaimed Professor Bloom, noticing. "You saw the shield. That's progress." Continue. By the end of the lesson, Iris managed to create a shield that held the cushion for a second before it passed through. This was far from full protection, but it was a beginning. And the feeling of magic when the shield formed was incredible, like cold water enveloping you, protecting and strengthening. Friday finally arrived, flying day. Iris woke earlier than the alarm, feeling butterflies in her stomach. She dressed quickly, ate breakfast, though she could barely swallow toast, and set off with the other first years to the Quidditch pitch where the lesson was to take place. Madame Hooch, the flying instructor, was a stern woman with short gray hair and yellow eyes like a hawk's. She stood on the field where even rows of school brooms already lay, old, worn, but functional. "Good afternoon," she greeted them in a stern voice. "Today you will learn the basics of flying. But first of all, remember, a broom obeys intent and control. If you're nervous or afraid, the broom will sense it. Be confident, but not arrogant." She showed them how to stand by the broom, left hand over it, right to the side. How to command the broom to come, clear up, and how to sit properly on the broom, slightly forward, knees firmly pressed. "Now try," ordered Madame Hooch. "Say up, and the broom should jump into your hand." Iris stood over her broom. It was old, with a worn handle and several bent twigs. Iris took a deep breath and commanded, "Up." The broom sharply jumped and flew into her palm. Iris caught it in surprise, feeling the light vibration of the wood, as if the broom were alive. "Good, Miss Bellamy," Madame Hooch approved. Not everyone was so lucky. Some students' brooms barely rolled. In others, they didn't move at all. One Hufflepuff boy shouted, "Up!" so loudly that the broom flew up and hit him on the nose. When everyone finally got brooms in their hands, Madame Hooch taught them how to mount the broom and how to take off. "You grip the broom tightly with your knees," she instructed. "Push off gently from the ground and lean slightly forward. The broom will do the rest." But in this lesson, no one rises higher than 4 feet from the ground. Understood? A chorus of "Yes, Madame Hooch" rang out in response. Iris mounted the broom, feeling her heart quicken. She gripped the broom with her knees as shown and pushed off gently, and took off. The feeling was incredible. Wind in her hair, the ground receding below, a feeling of freedom and lightness. Iris rose 3 feet and hovered there, easily balancing. The broom obeyed her every movement. When she leaned forward, the broom moved forward. When she pulled the handle back slightly, the broom slowed. "Excellent, Miss Bellamy," Madam Hooch called from below. "Natural talent." Iris wasn't certain about natural talent, but she truly felt comfortable on the broom. It was intuitive, like walking or running, only in the air. Isla also managed to take off, though she wobbled a bit. Daphne rose elegantly, with complete control. Marcus was cautious, barely rising 2 feet, but he maintained stability. The lesson lasted an hour, and during this time they learned basic maneuvers, moving forward and backward, turning, stopping. Several students fell, fortunately from a low height onto soft grass, but most managed well. When the lesson ended and Iris descended to the ground, her legs trembled from adrenaline and delight. She had done it. She had flown, and it was wonderful. "You were incredible!" exclaimed Isla, running up. "You flew as if you'd been doing it your whole life." It was just... Iris searched for words. Free. Like nothing else matters when you're up there, high. They returned to the castle, discussing the lesson, laughing about the falls, including their own, and planning to practice more. On Friday evening, Iris sat in the common room, finishing the last essay of the week. Most students had dispersed. Some went to dinner early, others for a walk on the grounds, taking advantage of the warm September evening. Suddenly, Daphne approached her, looking somewhat concerned. "Iris, can you help me?" she asked. "I can't understand this spell for transfiguration at all. My match hasn't changed for a week now." "Of course." Iris set down her quill. "Show me what you're doing." Daphne took out her match and wand. She flicked her wand and pronounced the spell. But the movement was too fast, too sharp. "Try slower," Iris advised, "and visualize more. Not just a needle in general, but a specific needle, sharp, silvery, with an eye. Imagine every detail." Daphne nodded and tried again, this time slower, with greater concentration. The match twitched slightly, and the tip became somewhat more silvery. "It's working," she smiled. "Thank you." They practiced together a bit more, and Iris felt warmth from being able to help. This was part of what made Hogwarts special. Not only learning, but also mutual help, growing together. Later, when Iris went up to the dormitory, she found Isla sitting on her bed, writing a letter. "Writing home?" asked Iris. "Yes," Isla smiled. "Telling my parents about flying today. They won't believe their daughter flies on a broom." Iris also decided to write a letter. She sat at the small table in the dormitory, unrolled parchment, and began writing. Dear Mom and Dad, the third week at Hogwarts has ended, and I can't even believe how quickly time flies. Today we had our first flying lesson, and Mom, you were right. It's an incredible feeling. I flew, and it was so free, so wonderful. Madam Hooch said I have natural talent, though I'm not sure about that. Potions is going well. This week we prepared sleeping draught, and Professor Waveborn praised my potion. I think, Mum, your lessons over the summer really helped. I understand the process. Feel when something isn't right. I've made real friends, Daphne, Isla, and Marcus. We do homework together, explore the castle together, support each other. Isla is Muggle-born, and she's so lively and curious. Daphne is very organized and clever. Marcus is quiet, but very kind and knowledgeable. Slytherin turned out not to be what I thought. Not everyone here is ambitious in a bad way. We simply all have dreams and want to achieve them, and that's normal. Hogwarts is truly becoming my home. I miss you, but I'm also happy here. With love, Iris. She sealed the letter and decided to send it tomorrow with an owl from the owlry. Saturday was peaceful. Iris woke late, had breakfast without hurrying, and then went for a walk with her friends. They walked to the lake, where they sat under the old tree, enjoying the warmth of September sun. 3 weeks, said Isla, lying on the grass and looking at the sky. Do you feel how much we've already learned? Yes, agreed Daphne. And this is only the beginning. There's still so much ahead. Marcus nodded silently, his book lying beside him, forgotten for a moment. Iris looked at the lake, at the castle's reflection in the water, at the light breeze creating ripples on the surface. She thought about the 3 weeks that had passed, about the sorting, about first lessons, about magic she'd already mastered, about friends she'd found, about the feeling of belonging that grew with each day. I'm glad the hat sent me to Slytherin, she suddenly said. Daphne and Isla looked at her in surprise. Why? Asked Isla. Because here I found myself, Iris smiled. At first I wasn't sure I belonged here. Thought perhaps Ravenclaw would have been better. But now I understand. Slytherin isn't about being bad or selfish. It's about knowing your goals and working to achieve them. And it's about finding people who understand you. Exactly, agreed Daphne. My sister said something similar. That Slytherin is about willpower and determination. And about supporting each other, added Isla. I'm Muggle-born in Slytherin, and I thought it would be difficult, but everyone here accepted me. They sat there a long time, talking, laughing, simply enjoying each other's presence. The sun slowly moved across the sky, shadows grew longer, and the temperature dropped slightly, but no one hurried to return. When finally it was time for dinner, they reluctantly rose and returned to the castle. The great hall was noisy and warm, filled with the smells of food and sounds of conversation. Iris sat at the Slytherin table, feeling herself part of something greater, Not just a house, but a community, a family. The 3rd week was over. Another awaited ahead. The last week of the 1st month. And Iris couldn't wait to see what it would bring. The 4th week began with a feeling that Iris couldn't quite describe. It was something like confidence, but softer. Something like belonging, but deeper. When she woke on Monday morning and looked at the green light from the lake filtering through the dormitory windows, she simply knew Hogwarts was her home now. A month had passed, a whole month of learning, magic, discoveries, and friendship. At breakfast, the mood was special. October was beginning next week, and the air was already growing cooler, carrying with it the first signs of autumn. The trees around the grounds were beginning to change colors, green giving way to gold, red, orange. "I can't believe a month has already passed," said Isla, buttering a hot roll. "It seems like we only arrived yesterday, but at the same time, as if we've always been here." "I know what you mean," nodded Daphne. "Time here flows strangely, quickly and slowly at once." Marcus silently agreed, but his smile was eloquent. The first lesson that week, potions, brought an unexpected announcement. Professor Waveborn stood before the class, her dark eyes surveying each student. "This week," she began, "we shall do something special. You have spent almost a month learning the basics of potions. You have learned to prepare simple potions under my guidance. Now the time has come to test your skills." She waved her wand, and on the blackboard appeared a recipe, a familiar recipe for the simple healing draft, their first potion. "On Friday, you will prepare this potion independently, without my prompts," Professor Waveborn continued. "This will be your first independent work, and it will be graded. This is a chance to show what you have learned. Use this week to review your notes, practice techniques, prepare." A wave of nervous whispers rolled through the class. Iris felt her stomach clench. The first graded work. This was serious. "Don't worry excessively," said Professor Waveborn, and a barely noticeable smile appeared on her face. "You are all capable of doing this. I wouldn't give you this task if I didn't believe in it. Simply be attentive, patient, and precise, as I have taught you." The rest of the lesson they spent reviewing potion-making techniques, proper cutting of ingredients, temperature control, precision of measurements. Professor Waveborn walked between the tables, correcting mistakes, giving advice, encouraging. When Iris returned to the common room after lunch, she immediately took out her potions notes. She spread them on the table by the fireplace and began carefully reviewing every step, every detail, every warning. "Preparing for Friday?" asked Daphne, sitting down beside her with her own notes. "Yes," Iris nodded. "I want to be sure I remember everything." "We can study together," Daphne suggested. "Cross-checking will help." They spent an hour testing each other's knowledge, names of ingredients, order of addition, correct temperatures, brewing time. Marcus joined them a bit later, and even Isla, who was usually more relaxed about studying, sat with them, carefully recopying her messy notes into more readable form. Tuesday brought transfiguration, and Professor Grayson had a surprise for them. He led them through the entire process of transforming a match into a needle once more, step by step, answering all questions. Transfiguration, he said, drawing diagrams on the blackboard, is about understanding the essence of things. A match is wood, organic matter that grew, lived. A needle is metal, inorganic matter created through processing ore. You are asking magic to change the very nature of the object. It isn't easy, but you can do it if you understand both objects completely. He gave them the rest of the lesson for practice. Iris sat over her match, concentrating with all the strength she was capable of. She imagined the wood from which the match was made, how it grew, how it was cut, how it was processed. Then imagined the metal of the needle, cold, hard, shaped by heat and hammer. Mutatio acus, she pronounced clearly, flicking her wand. The match changed. It became thin, long, almost completely silvery. The tip was sharp, and there at the other end appeared a small indentation, the beginning of an eye. Iris couldn't believe her eyes. She had almost done it, almost completely transformed the match into a needle. Miss Bellamy, Professor Grayson approached her table, his eyes widening in surprise. This is outstanding for the first month. Most students reach this level only by Christmas. 20 points to Slytherin. Iris felt warmth of pride, but also a strange feeling of humility. She had worked hard, yes, but it was also about Professor Grayson being a wonderful teacher, about her friends supporting her, about Hogwarts inspiring her to be better. By the end of the lesson, 2 more students achieved similar results. A Gryffindor boy and a Slytherin girl named Miranda, her dormitory neighbor. Professor Grayson looked exceptionally pleased. "You are all making excellent progress," he said at the end of the lesson. "Continue in the same spirit, and by the end of term, you will all have proper needles. And some of you," he smiled, looking at Iris and the others who had made progress, "perhaps will be ready for more complex transformations." Wednesday was Charms Day. Professor Flitwick decided to check their progress with Wingardium Leviosa, which they had been practicing for several weeks. "Today," he announced, standing on his pile of books, "we shall test who can keep a feather in the air for 30 seconds. This requires not only correct technique, but also concentration and endurance." Iris was nervous, but also excited. She had practiced levitation a lot, sometimes in the evenings in the common room, sometimes in the mornings before breakfast. Her record was 20 seconds. When her turn came, Iris approached Professor Flitwick's table where the feather lay. She took a deep breath, raised her wand, and concentrated. Imagined how magic flowed through her, how it wrapped around the feather, how it gently lifted it upward. Wingardium Leviosa, she pronounced clearly, performing the correct wand movement. The feather shuddered, then smoothly rose into the air. It hovered at eye level with Iris, gently swaying. Iris maintained concentration, feeling how magic pulsed through the wand, maintaining connection with the feather. Strictly Flitwick counted the seconds aloud. 10, 15, 20, 25. Iris felt herself beginning to lose concentration. Her hand trembled from the strain. A bit more. Just a bit more. 28, 29, 30, exclaimed Professor Flitwick, and the feather gently descended to the table. Iris exhaled, feeling tension leaving her body. She had done it. Excellent, Miss Bellamy, clapped his hands. 15 points to Slytherin. You are one of the few who reached 30 seconds in the first month. Iris returned to her seat under applause from classmates. Isla hugged her, Daphne smiled with pride, and Marcus showed her a thumbs up. That evening, in the common room, Iris received an unexpected visitor. Professor Waveborn entered through the entrance, looked around, and approached Iris, who sat by the fireplace with a textbook. "Miss Bellamy," said Professor Waveborn, "may I speak with you, privately if possible?" Iris nodded in surprise and rose, following the professor to a small corner of the common room, where there were only 2 armchairs and a small lamp. "Don't worry," Professor Waveborn smiled, seeing the concerned expression on Iris's face. "You're not in trouble. On the contrary, I wanted to speak with you about your progress." They sat, and Professor Waveborn fell silent for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. "I have been teaching for 15 years, she began, "and I have seen many students. Some of them have natural talent for potions, some have passion but lack patience, and some, very rare, have both talent and passion and patience. You, Miss Bellamy, belong to the last category." Iris didn't know what to say. She felt herself blushing. "Your work in lessons is impeccable," Professor Waveborn continued. "You are attentive to details. You understand not simply how, but why. You don't simply follow recipes. You understand the magic behind them. This is a rare quality." "Thank you, Professor," Iris said quietly. I simply love potions." "My mother is a potions mistress, and I've always wanted to be like her." "And you will be," Professor Waveborn said confidently. "Perhaps even better. But I want you to remember something important. Slytherin has a reputation, and not always a positive one. But being a Slytherin doesn't mean being bad or selfish. It means having ambition, having a goal and working towards it. Your goal is to become a potions mistress, and that's a wonderful goal. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise because of the green and silver colors on your robes." Iris nodded, feeling something warm and strong filling her chest. "I believe in you, Miss Bellamy." Professor Waveborn rose. "And I look forward to seeing what witch you become." She left, leaving Iris sitting in the armchair, stunned and moved. This wasn't just praise from a teacher. It was recognition, support, belief in her future. Thursday evening after dinner, Professor McGonagall made an unexpected announcement in the Great Hall. She tapped on her goblet to attract attention, and all conversations ceased. "This evening," she said, "by ancient Hogwarts tradition, first years of all houses are invited for a moonlit walk of the grounds. This is a special tradition for those who have completed their first month of learning. You will gather at the great doors at 9 o'clock this evening, and the prefects will lead you. It will be safe and supervised, but also special. Please all be punctual." A wave of excited whispers rolled through all the tables. A moonlit walk! Iris had heard about this from older students. It was a magical tradition when first years first saw Hogwarts and its grounds under the moon after completing their first month of learning. At 9 o'clock in the evening, all first years gathered at the great doors. The moon was nearly full, and the sky was clear, studded with stars. Prefects of all 4 houses were there, holding wands illuminated with soft lumos. "Follow me," said Celine, the Slytherin prefect. "Stay together and enjoy." They went out into the night. The air was cool but not cold, and it smelt of autumn leaves and damp earth. The moon illuminated everything with silver light. The castle looked even more majestic, towers reaching for the starry sky, windows sparkling with warm light from within. They walked past the lake, where the water was calm and mirror-like, reflecting the moon and stars. Iris saw something large moving beneath the water, the giant squid, peacefully swimming in the depths. "Look," whispered Isla, pointing at the forbidden forest. At the forest's edge stood a group of deer, real deer, not magical ones, their eyes reflecting in the moonlight. They watched the students calmly, without fear, then turned and disappeared between the trees. The prefects led them to a small hill overlooking the entire castle and lake. There they stopped. "This place," said Adrian, the Slytherin prefect, "is called First Point. This is where all first years are brought after the first month. Here you can pause and think about your journey so far, about who you were when you arrived, and who you are becoming now." Iris stood there, looking at the castle. The moon illuminated it, making the stone walls silver and the windows golden. She thought about herself a month ago, a nervous girl who wasn't certain whether she belonged in Slytherin. And now she knew. She belonged. This was her home, her place, her path. "What are you thinking?" Daphne asked quietly, standing beside her. "I'm thinking," Iris replied just as quietly, "that I finally know where my place is." They stood there a few more minutes in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Then the prefects led them back to the castle, and everyone returned to their common rooms filled with peace and wonder. Friday arrived too quickly, the day of independent work in potions. Iris woke with butterflies in her stomach, but also with a feeling of readiness. She had studied everything. She knew every step. She could do this. The potions lesson began in silence. Professor Waveborn stood before the class, her expression serious. "On your tables you will find all necessary ingredients," she said. "The recipe is on the blackboard. You have 2 hours. Work carefully, precisely, and don't hurry. I shall not give prompts or help. This is your independent work. Begin." Iris took a deep breath and looked at the ingredients before her. Lavender, valerian root, moonstone, dew. Everything in its place, just as a month ago at her first lesson. She began methodically. First prepared all the ingredients, counted out 4 stems of lavender, no more, no less. Sliced the valerian into transparent slices, measured exactly 1 teaspoon of moonstone, prepared the phial of dew. Then she lit the fire under the cauldron, poured in distilled water, and began the process. Every step was deliberate, every movement precise. She didn't hurry, didn't get nervous. Simply followed the process she had learned and practiced a month ago, and repeated since. When the time came to add the dew, 3 drops with 30-second intervals, Iris counted the seconds in her head, calmly and confidently. First drop, count. Second drop, count. Third drop. The potion hissed, gleamed, and acquired the perfect deep purple silvery color. The scent was correct, of lavender and something soft, calming, reminiscent of coziness and peace. Iris carefully poured the potion into a phial and placed it at the edge of her table with her name. Then began tidying her workspace as Professor Waveborn had taught them. When 2 hours passed, Professor Waveborn began walking between the tables, examining each potion. She held a small notebook in which she made notes. Some students looked confident, others nervous. When Professor Waveborn reached Iris's phial, she lifted it, looked at it against the light, smelt it, and nodded. "Flawless, Miss Bellamy," she said, and there was a note of pride in her voice. "The color is perfect, the scent correct, the consistency precise. This potion receives the highest grade. Outstanding. 20 points to Slytherin." Iris felt a wave of relief and joy. She had done it. She had truly done it. After the lesson, as they left the dungeons, Daphne hugged her. "You were incredible. I saw your potion. It was the best in the class." "Mine turned out well, too," smiled Isla. "Exceeds expectations." "I can't believe it." Marcus quietly congratulated Iris, and his smile said more than words. The weekend passed in a relaxed atmosphere. Iris wrote a detailed letter home, telling about the whole month, about successes, about friends, about how Hogwarts had become home. She described the moonlit walk, Professor Waveborn, her independent work in potions, flying on a broom. She wrote about everything, trying to convey to her parents not only facts, but feelings, the magic of being here, learning here, growing here. On Sunday evening, as October officially began the next day, Iris sat in the Slytherin common room with her friends. The fireplace blazed, casting warm orange light. Outside the window, the lake was dark, and from time to time, something large swam past. Perhaps the squid, perhaps something else. "A month has passed," said Isla, hugging a cushion. "The first month at Hogwarts. How do you all feel?" Daphne pondered. "I feel stronger, not physically, but internally, more confident in myself. I know who I am and what I want." Marcus nodded. "I feel as if I've found my place. I've always been an outsider amongst people, but here I feel accepted." "And you, Iris?" asked Isla. Iris looked at the fire, gathering her thoughts. "I feel at home," she said finally. "When I came here a month ago, I didn't know if I belonged in Slytherin. I didn't know if I could cope with magic, with learning, with life here. But now I know. I belong here. Slytherin is my home. Hogwarts is my home. And you all are my family," she added, looking at her friends. Isla wiped away a tear. "You're making me cry," she laughed through tears. "But yes, I feel the same way. We're family now." They sat there a long time, talking about the past month, about the best moments, about the funniest incidents, like the time Isla accidentally turned her quill into a frog in Transfiguration, about plans for the future. When the fire began dying down and students one by one began dispersing to dormitories, Iris stayed a bit longer. She sat in the armchair, looking at the dying embers, listening to the quiet sounds of the castle, distant footsteps, creaking stairs, whispers of portraits, lapping of water outside the window. A month had passed, the first month at Hogwarts, a month of magic, learning, discoveries, friendship, growth. A month when she transformed from a nervous girl who didn't know her place into a young witch who was beginning to understand who she could become. Iris smiled, rose, and went to the dormitory. Daphne and Isla were already asleep, their breathing even and calm. Iris quietly changed and crawled under the blanket. She lay looking at the green light from the lake dancing on the ceiling and felt deep peace. The first month was over. There were still many months, years of learning at Hogwarts ahead. So much magic to master, so much knowledge to gain, so many adventures waiting for her. But for now, on this quiet October night, Iris was simply grateful. Grateful for Hogwarts, for Slytherin, for friends, for magic, for the chance to become who she was always meant to be. She closed her eyes and smiled. Home. She was home. And this was only the beginning.